Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video, and today we are headed back to Sam O'Nella Academy. Before we get into this reaction today, which is about dead body hijinks, which I confess I have a fascination with, so I'm curious to see which stories he's going to talk about. I just want to let you know, you may have already seen a notification that we're going to be doing a live stream tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. A lot going on in that live stream. It will be a standard kind of Q&A live stream where I'll be taking questions from you guys, but also I have a number of things I want to cover, things that I didn't want to just throw into the beginning of a video. So I want to talk about some upcoming trips that I have that will include opportunities for you guys to join me touring some historic sites. I want to talk about some podcasts that I'm going to be a part of on some other channels, so I'm excited about that. I want to talk about some possibilities for some upcoming collaboration, as well as mention another giveaway and a few other things that we have going on here on the channel that I'm excited to share with you. So with all of that said, make sure you have subscription turned on, make sure you have notifications turned on, and you can actually go in. I've already created that stream for tomorrow. You can go in and specifically turn on that notification so that you'll get a notification as soon as the stream begins. All right, let's dive into some dead body hijinks, and if he doesn't cover some of the ones that I've found most interesting, I may kind of add to this story a little bit, but let's see what he's got to say. Oh, this is part one. Okay.
Hey kids, whether you're a precocious young lad down by the swimming hole or a grizzled crime scene investigator, everybody's got some interest in dead bodies. Yes, from Weekend at Bernie's to Weekend at Bernie's 2 to Weekend at Bernie's 3 Revelations, stories about wayward corpses have certainly carved their niche in today's media. So, I thought I'd spin a few yarns about some real-life people who were kept out far past their expiration date. Our first tale follows one Elmer McCurdy. He was an outlaw during the twilight days of the Wild West. Thanks to his former life as a miner, McCurdy acted as the demolitions expert to his little posse, using nitroglycerin basically anytime he had the faintest excuse to do so. Except, he was kind of a moron, so it didn't usually go quite as planned. Gotta say, after peanut butter and chocolate, my favorite combination of two things is probably gross incompetence and high explosives. Example, in March of 1911, McCurdy's band of rabble-rousers found out that $4,000 were in a safe in an approaching train. They managed to stop the entire locomotive, I don't even know how you do that, break in, hold everyone on board hostage, and locate the safe. McCurdy steps up to plate, right? Gotta blast the thing open, except I guess the excitement kinda got to him, because he ended up using like way too much nitroglycerin, like inordinate amounts. Ended up completely destroying the safe and its contents, and what few silver coins they made out with were literally melted to the frame of the safe and had to be peeled off. Anyway, he died in a shootout with police later that year, and the undertaker at the funeral home he was sent to couldn't find any next of kin on account of McCurdy being a rambling low-life varmint, so he just embalmed the hell out of him and said, "Hey boys and girls, want to see a dead criminal? Only one shiny nickel." And
What? So I was about to say, why would you bother embalming him? Typically with criminals or bodies that weren't being claimed by anybody, they just throw them in a pauper's grave, probably unmarked, and then you really never hear anything about them again. And those are fascinating stories in and of themselves. New York City's got a massive, I think, an island where they buried all these people. And it's kind of sad in one sense, because whatever a person might have done in life, they were still human beings, and at some point there was somebody who cared about them. And it's difficult to think about being forgotten like this, but let's hear a little more of this story.
Since LiveLeak wasn't around at the time, there weren't many places a kid could go to stare at a corpse for a while if he or she so desired, so it actually became a pretty popular attraction. Visitors would pay their dues by physically slipping the coin into the man's mouth, and the creepy-ass undertaker would come fish him out later, probably with bare hands, all slowly and sensual-like. A few years passed when a couple of guys showed up claiming to be McCurdy's brothers, with a note from the local sheriff to back it up. They told the undertaker they had permission to go bury McCurdy, so he reluctantly relinquished the body to the men. Except, these guys weren't his brothers. They were just a couple of crusty freaking carnies. They shipped the body off to Kansas to become an attraction in their traveling show. From here, McCurdy traded hands a few more times. At one point, he was exploited for this one guy's film about narcotics. It was like, yeah, this pill-popping degenerate got shot while trying to rob a pharmacy from one.
Jeez. So, you know, it's easy for us to look at this and say, oh, come on. what is wrong with people? And, you know, we look at things like public executions and we think, man, people were sick back then. But if you think about it, there's really not a lot of difference between that and what we have today. Like he said, things like LiveLeak, where people go and watch these videos of these things that happen. You know, you've got a group of people who actually find interest in watching execution videos of people in the Middle East and places like that. You know, or just look at how much we as a culture enjoy violent movies. Things like Saw, where we see people die in gruesome ways. Even though it's not real, we still find that interesting and fascinating, and we can't look away. And so that has always been a part of human nature. It's just that back then you couldn't fake it. So the only way to get that experience was for it to be real.
More dope the other day. The body was super old by then, so people are like, wait, why is he all desiccated and flaky and gross? He just goes, yep, that's what happens when you do drugs, kids. Your fucking skin falls off. Stay above the influence. At some point in his journey, he ended up getting coated in wax and paint to look a little less rotty, before ending up in a warehouse in 1949. Here's the thing, he was in there alongside some actual wax figures, and after spending 19 years in storage, nobody knew he was a real corpse anymore, so he ended up getting sold in 1968 as a mannequin to one Spoony Singh, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum. He tried to lend the guy out a couple times during his stay, but people found him too gross or unrealistic looking for whatever purposes they had in mind. So he ended up getting sold again and used as a prop of a hanged man at the Pike Amusement Zone in their funhouse ride.
Okay, this is the part that I remember. I've heard this part of the story where there was a real life body being hanged. I just didn't know all the backstory before that.
With zero knowledge that he was an actual dead criminal. It wasn't until 1976, 65 years after his death, that an episode of The $6 Million Man was being filmed at the complex, and a stagehand tried to move the prop around only to have its arm break off in his hand. He was like, ugh, lousy stiff. Wait a minute, that's curious. This mannequin's got human flesh and bones inside of it. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. 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 The autopsy confirmed what everyone present at the time suspected. By this point, the body was so dried out and stale that it only weighed 50 pounds, which makes me think we should start a radical new fad diet where we just get people to mummify parts of their body. Like, Jenny, guess what? I just lost 30 pounds in 5 days. Wow, holy heck, how'd you do that? They call it the Egyptian cleanse.
Oh
anyway,
God.
With that, McCurdy was finally laid to rest back in his homeland of Oklahoma, and that film crew's lives were never the same again. Flashback to late 18th century.
Baloney.
There lived a physician by the name of Luigi Galvani. This guy was a big deal. He's the dude who discovered that, hey, animals got electricity in them. And
That's where we get the word galvanize from, Galvani.
his legacy still survives today in words like galvanize. One of his most famous experiments was the one where he used static electricity to make frog legs twitch on command. Around these parts, we call that the French salute. Ha ha!
Oh my gosh.
Stereotypes funny. Well, in 1803, his nephew, Giovanni Aldini, said, hey, that's pretty nifty and all, but what if we tried it on people? So the city of London was like, hey, now you're thinking with portals. One freshly executed criminal coming up. Aldini gathered a crowd and applied 2 diodes to the corpse's head, causing his face to scrunch up and one eye to flick open.
So you can see where they get the idea for Frankenstein from this, with the diodes and everything. And the electricity to kind of bring it back to life. There's where that idea was really born.
Aldini was a showman though, he wanted some real action. So he then put the current through opposite points in the body, which made the whole thing flail around like Pinocchio in heat. Now today we know he was just exciting the dead muscles, right? But the people who were watching had no idea what was going on. So they were like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a fucking necromancer. Quick, go get grandma, maybe we can get in the will after all. Fun fact, this experiment actually ended up serving as inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which makes me wonder what other—
I swear I haven't seen this video, and the fact that now twice in this video I've said something that he later actually talks about, complete coincidence, I swear.
Other famous novels were based on real life events. Was a white whale ever pursued by a vengeful sea captain? Was there actually a mentally handicapped migrant worker who liked hugging rabbits to death? Was there ever a human soul as profoundly asinine and willfully ignorant as Amelia Bedelia?
Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at part 2.
Hey kids, time to talk about more cases of stiff lifting from the days of yore. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out. Or don't. I'm a YouTuber, not a cop. unfortunately. This first tale doesn't feature an entire dead body, but I still found it interesting enough to talk about. So one day in 2012, a priest was riding a train out of Italy when his bag got stolen by a trio of thieves. Inside the bag was whatever normal personal possessions the guy happened to own, as well as a small vial containing the blood of none other than Pope John Paul II. So this begs the question, why did the priest have Pope blood in his bag? Well, an important way that the Catholic Church honors saints and other venerated individuals is the keeping of relics. These relics are ranked in terms of how close they were to the person at hand. You got something that's tangentially related to a saint in any way, that's a third-class relic.
The urinal in Lebanon that Clement VII used once. Pius XII's ex-wife's tissue box. Okay.
If it's a personal possession of a saint, it's second class. And as for first class relics, those typically consist of literal body parts and or fluids of a holy figure. Now for you youngsters out there, in 1981, the Pope got shot 4 times by some fascist having a bad day. People are like, holy shit, it's a popicide! Is that even a word? No, I'm okay. Oh. Say, who left all this first class relic lying around? So did...
And by the way, Pope John Paul II, who I think was a fantastic human being, by the way, and was Polish, which was interesting because he was then followed by a German as Pope. But he actually met with the guy who tried to kill him and forgave him, and there was this whole big thing. And so I just always found that story really fascinating.
To this day, there remain 3 objects containing the fine-aged poppy juice spilled that fateful afternoon. The vial was found a few hours later by police among the reeds and grass near the station, which basically means the thieves took one look at it and were like, blood? I already make this myself. Lame, and tossed it out without a second thought. Here's the thing though, that's not the only instance of old JP2 getting blood napped. In 2014, a similar relic was yoinked from the church of San Pietro della Ienca in Italy alongside a crucifix. The fact that these were the only items taken led to 2 prevailing theories. Some people thought that, since John Paul II wasn't technically a saint yet, the relic's value would go way up once the man was actually canonized, so the thieves decided to take it now and resell it later. The other theory was way more popular with the media. After all, what use does Pope blood have other than satanic rituals? This story naturally got a lot of press, and the whole world just kind of assumed that Lucifer himself was set to return any day now. Eventually, the thieves confessed, so authorities came to the rehab facility they were staying at. They returned the cross, but when questioned about the relic, they were like, wait, what? Pope blood? Satan? Do you guys need to check in here too? Eventually, it was found in a rubbish bin on the facility grounds, which means once again, it was just casually tossed out as nonsense. You ever throw out Pope blood? Because apparently, multiple people have done that on separate occasions just in the past 7 years. It doesn't end there, of course. In 2016, this happened a 3rd time when a piece of cloth with John Paul fluid on it was taken from Cologne Cathedral. I can't for the life of me find a follow-up to this story, which leads me to believe that they're just like, fuck it, Pope blood's more trouble than it's worth at this point. But if you guys can find some conclusion to where it ended up, let me know below. Now, our next story begins with a man named Karl Tanzler, a German-born radiology technologist in early 20th century Florida. He looked kind of like
this
Sigmund
guy.
Freud.
Okay, I know this guy's story, and this is uber creepy. What this guy does with this young woman for years is nuts. And assuming that he doesn't go into too many more of these stories, stick around to the end because I want to share with you a couple of my own stories about some pretty famous historical figures whose bodies have been tampered with, kidnapped, attempted to be kidnapped, things like that.
Except even more evil looking. On the inside, he was a pretty normal dude, other than the fact that he claimed to have visions throughout his life of some mysterious dark-haired girl. Anyway, in 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, he met a young woman by the name of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, called Elena for short, and he said, "Oh my god, that's the girl from the visions I've been having." Yeah, wait, what? "We were meant to meet today. We must be soulmates." What? Don't you have like a wife and 2 kids? Destiny. Hoyos was soon diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was considered fatal at the time, so naturally, Karl decided to handle her treatment, going as far as convincing her family to let him visit their home every day. Except, he was a radiologist, so even if there were reliable means to treat tuberculosis at the time, he definitely didn't have the credentials to do so, but whatever.
And a lot of times you'll see in records people diagnosed what they called consumption. And consumption was kind of a catch-all title that included tuberculosis, but it was really kind of any disease where you kind of were wasting away, a wasting disease of some kind where your body was consuming itself. Very common, though, for consumption to be tuberculosis.
This is the past we're talking about, after all. That place was a shit show from start to finish. I'm not about to get on somebody's case for a little clerical error. In addition to whatever salves and tinctures and such doctors gave to people back then, Tansler showered her with gifts of clothes and jewelry. I know he meant well, but if I was bedridden with a terminal illness, I'd just be insulted. Like, wow, thanks, can't wait to show off this little number out on the town. Anyway, eventually, Tansler found that the time had come to reveal his true feelings. Elena, there's something I must confess. I'm deeply in love with you. I'm so glad you feel the same. Hoyos inevitably succumbed to the disease, leaving Tansler heartbroken. He just wasn't ready to part ways with his pestilence-riddled sweetheart, so he asked the family's permission to commission an above-ground mausoleum for their daughter. And since this was the early 20th century, they said, what a sweet, selfless man. I'm sure he'd never do this just so he could commit crimes against nature. Then he was like, oh yeah, by the way, could I have some of her hair too? Sure, kind stranger. Here's a bag of her hair we just had lying around for some fucking reason. Again, no red flags here. He went to visit her dwelling nearly every night for 2 years. Then finally one day he said, you know what, kid? You're alright. Say, how's about we ditch this musty old mausoleum and go back to my place? I'll take that as a yes. So he took her home in a little red toy wagon, which is ridiculous. It makes me picture him skipping around, whistling a merry tune. Hey neighbor! Now here's a riddle for all you intellectuals out there. What do a dead body and a used PT Cruiser have in common? Sure, they both taste terrible, and you never want to be seen in public with one. Most importantly though, they're a depreciating asset. But hey, that didn't stop old Gnarly Carly from sprucing her up any way he could. Wiring her bones back together with coat hangers, replacing her skin with wax and silk, making a wig out of that bag of hair from earlier, and soaking the body in massive amounts of perfume and disinfectants, for obvious reasons.
He also used, I apologize in advance for this, some kind of a tube that he inserted in her vagina so he could have his way with her.
He claimed to have been instructed to do all this by Elena's spirit, which he would apparently talk to frequently. He also did, you know, that thing eccentric loners do with dead ladies in their house, but we won't talk about that. This went on for 7 years. 7 hot and humid Florida years. Until 1940, when Elena's sister saw him dancing with some lady through the curtains. She's like, aw, how cute. I'm glad that old bag of lentils has finally found love. Walks in, comes to find out it's her fucking dead sister. So the cops come, but there isn't any conclusive evidence of any flirting and philandering with the body, so the only crime Carl could have been charged with was grave robbing. Except the statute of limitations was already up by the time he was found out.
He's had the body for so long that it no longer is considered a crime because he robbed it so long ago that the statute of limitations ran out. It's not over.
So they just took the body, tipped their hats, and went on their merry way. Tansler still missed Elena dearly, but since he couldn't have her cadaver, he crafted a crude homemade effigy of the lady, which he lived with for the rest of his life. Here's the part that really gets me though. He apparently went back to live with his estranged wife once the jig was up. Just like, hey babe, I know we haven't talked since the whole corpse thing, but I've been having trouble making rent. Do you think I could come crash for a while? Sure, come right in. I'll take your coats. Would you and the demented life-size replica of your long-dead lover that you left me for like a cup of tea? I'd like one. None for her, though. It goes right through her. Of course, I'm making all this out to be a horrifying thing for the goofs and gaffs of it, but at the time, a lot of people read the news stories about Tansler, and many actually sympathized with the man.
Yeah.
They saw him as the distraught, hapless romantic that he saw himself as. You know why they had that compassion? Because they listened. Say, what would the world look like if we all listened more?
So, looks like that's the last story he's going to get into. Let's talk about a couple of really interesting ones. Abraham Lincoln, for example. There were a number of stories of people trying to kidnap Abraham Lincoln's body. At one point, they actually got the coffin partway out, and they were in the process of kidnapping, and they were going to hold him for ransom. And so there were a number of attempts to try and steal his body, to the point where when they finally created the tomb that he's in today, Robert Todd Lincoln, his only surviving son, actually had the coffin placed inside of a steel cage and then buried under several feet of concrete so nobody could get at the body. But when they did this, I think it was 1901, so it was like 36 years after he died. It was somewhere in that area of time. They wanted to verify that his body was in there, so they actually opened the casket And a number of people testified to what they observed, which was, number one, that he looked just like he did in life, except for, I think his eyebrows were gone, and there was a little bit of mold and things like that. But Abraham Lincoln, it was like a month after he was killed before he was actually buried, and so they had repeatedly embalmed the body for all of the funerals they had in all the major northern cities as the train kind of funeral procession went around. So he had been repeatedly embalmed, and embalmed very well, to where to this day, if you went down there and you dug up Abraham Lincoln's body, he'd probably be in pretty good condition. Another one is the body of John Scott Harrison. During the 1800s especially, there was a lot of grave robbing that went on. They called these people ghouls, Ghouls, who would grave rob, and a lot of times they would sell the bodies to medical schools, so that the medical schools had cadavers to work on, and medical schools a lot of times didn't ask questions about where the bodies came from. And so John Scott Harrison, who was the son of President William Henry Harrison and the father of future President Benjamin Harrison, and also then like a grandson or great-grandson of a signer of the Declaration of Independence. John Scott Harrison's body was dug up right after he died. He had been a congressman himself. And they found his body hanging on a meat hook. It's just horrifying to think about. And so there are a lot of those kinds of stories like that that are out there. There's also a ton of really interesting and fascinating stories about historic exhumations, and we might do a video on it at some point if you're into that sort of thing. But that was pretty interesting, a little creepy, and I know that's probably not for everybody, but a fascinating couple of stories nonetheless. Salmonella has a pretty unique kind of sense of humor that I find interesting and I kind of like, but I know it's probably not for everybody. But let me know your thoughts. Use the comment section below. We're going to be getting into some non-American history in the weeks ahead. We're going to be looking at a series on the history of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, which I think will be very interesting, and it's not something I know a lot about, so it'll be a chance for us to all learn together. If you have other suggestions for reactions, let me know in the comment section below, and be watching. We'll have some more original content coming in the near future, as well as the stream tomorrow. Hope you join us for that. Thanks for watching.